Hi, it's Nikki Heim, CFO of Logic Source, and you are listening to the CFO Thought Leader Podcast.
This is episode 1092.
And our glasses, based on either single vision or progressive, so based on the prescription strength and the type of material, have a singular price. So the glasses that I'm wearing right here are acetate glasses, which cost $95. It includes the frame, the prescription lens with all of the coatings, and free home delivery. And so that unified pricing in and of itself is a much better customer experience. But by also developing a supply chain where in many ways we've, whether you call it cut out the middleman or go directly to the consumer, we don't have the wholesale to retail markup. We don't pay a licensing fee to another brand, and we're able to pass those savings along to our customers and do it in a way where we still have a very strong gross margin on a product-specific basis. And so the way that we've been able to offer product at a dramatically lower price, it's by developing a very efficient supply chain and one that has less steps along the way where there are other third parties who can extract the value. And what we do is we're able to pass that value along to our customers and still do it at a very, very healthy margin.
Nearly 14 years ago, Stephen Miller entered the CFO office at Warby Parker. At the time, the firm widely known as the Buy a Pair, Give a Pair company had 20 employees and no stores. Today, Warby is approaching 4,000 people and has 280 stores, while adding 40-plus new locations a year. 8 capital raises and a 2021 direct listing later, Miller's remit has remained constant. Align capital with purpose. Stephen Miller's CFO journey on this episode of CFO Thought Leader. We begin after this.
When it comes to company spend, most finance teams are on defense, reacting to surprise spend, chasing receipts, saying no. But there's a better way. Meet Brex, the AI-powered spend platform that boosts a company's control, earnings, and speed. 99% of customer spend is compliant. 11 million hours saved on expenses and accounting through automation. $681 million plus dollars back to customers in business building rewards. Make every dollar count with Brex.
Hello, we're speaking with Steve Miller, CFO of Warby Parker. Steve, welcome.
Thank you. Very excited to be here, and thank you for taking the time to talk to me.
Well, Steve Miller has resided in the CFO office at Warby Parker for the past 13 and a half years, but he began his professional life as a strategy consultant at Monitor. He would enter the CFO office for the first time less than 10 years after his strategy consulting stint. And we'd like to ask you about that block of time, that unique path you took to becoming a CFO, Steve. What were some of the experiences that you feel helped move you down that path?
Yeah, for sure. And so it certainly was an evolution. I hadn't set my sights on becoming a CFO or a CFO of a public company until later in my career. So we'll talk a little bit about the early days before I became a CFO at Majestic Research. I started my career, as you mentioned, as a strategy consultant at Monitor Company. Monitor has now been folded into a larger consulting firm, Deloitte Consulting. When I joined Monitor straight out of school, I was drawn to the company because they had this country competitiveness. I was drawn to the company because they had this country competitiveness consulting practice where they consulted for the governments of developing countries like South Africa, Colombia, Peru, Bermuda at the time. And my undergraduate degree was really liberal arts degree, the intersection of politics and economics, and thought it would be really fascinating to work at the intersection of those two areas in the context of my first job at a consulting firm. I didn't end up working in that practice. I ended up working in Monitor's core strategy consulting practice for large telecom companies and large tech companies. And that really introduced me to a few things. One is core financial analytics, number one. Number two, wrapping my head around understanding the sources of growth and leverage and competitive advantage in specific industries. And that's kind of where I really first developed my analytical toolkit and ability to understand financial statements, and set me on the path to really wanting to understand what makes companies competitive, what makes countries competitive. And that was my first work experience down the CFO path.
It's interesting. You have a diverse number of chapters from a point of comparison with other finance leaders we speak to. You mentioned tech and telecom, but your resume is not that of a tech CFO, really. What were you thinking industry-wise, or did it not matter?
Yeah, I wasn't focused on a specific industry. At Monitor, one of the nice things about joining a consulting firm is you can work across industries. And I ended up working on a project in the insurance industry, and insurance always seemed a little intangible and boring to me. And it was one of the best projects that I worked on during my tenure at Monitor, largely because the manager was really, really wonderful to work for. And it really opened my eyes to, you choose the manager first, you choose the industry next, and you want to believe in the work that you're doing. And I was never so much focused on the industry as opposed to the manager, the leadership team, the vision, and feeling whether or not I could be attached to the work. After leaving Monitor, I ended up getting a public service fellowship, and I worked for the city of New York. It was a program called the Urban Fellows Program, where you work for a year at a city agency on a special project. I worked for the Department of Information Technology and Telecommunications. It was a fascinating year, introduced me to public service and how New York City operates. But I remember at the very start of the program, there was one of the commissioners of a city agency, the agency that I ultimately worked for, came to talk to the fellows about how to understand New York City government, the size of the budget, how that compares to the state budget, the federal budget. The New York City budget was, I think, the third largest budget in the U.S. at the time. It was federal, New York State, New York City. Something along those lines. And I'll never forget what the commissioner said, and this is probably what really planted the seed around me wanting to work as a CFO. He said, if you really want to understand the values of the society in which you live, don't listen to the politicians, don't listen to what people say, get yourself a copy of the budget and read it. If your politicians are telling you that education and art is important, but they're cutting the budget in those areas, well, then education, art, whatever the topic is not that important to them. You want to make sure that to really understand the values of the society in which you live, read the budget. And I think that, for me, from a philosophical perspective, was a seminal moment to really understanding how important budgeting and finance is to what you see in the real world, because what you see in the real world is really a reflection of how you allocate capital. And I think at a young age, that was sort of a very powerful statement to me.
There is a thread here. It's interesting, this fellowship that you were part of, and I'll mention you studied poli-sci undergrad. You were still searching at that point what path I'm headed down. We wanted to understand better what were the corporate titles or the typical ladder climbing. It's corporate development, isn't it?
Yes, that was the path that I pursued. So after working for New York City government, I realized that working for kind of large bureaucratic organizations was not the place that I felt was right for me. and I ended up getting a job as an analyst at a venture capital fund. And back in the early internet heydays, this was one of the leading investors in internet companies in the New York City area, Flatiron Partners. And that's really what set me down the path of focusing on understanding how smaller, fast-growing companies become bigger, fast-growing companies in the context of the dot-com boom and dot-com bust. I ended up from there getting a job in corporate development for a startup company called GameLogic, which was ultimately acquired. And my kind of role in the context of corporate development was really thinking through strategic partnerships. How do we kind of build this company and introduce a new product that hadn't been introduced before, through kind of negotiations and financial planning to try and introduce something into the world using technology that didn't exist before. And so that really was, the path that I chose, not the accounting path or the controllership path to the CFO seat. It was more corporate development, strategy, and strategic finance.
Was it at GameLogic, perhaps, that you first really got to work side by side the CFO? Exposure to that role, where did that happen first?
Yeah, exposure to that role, I'd say it happens in a few different places. So one was, as an analyst at Flatiron, I worked with the VPs of finance and CFOs at a range of startup companies. So that was my initial entree. I went on to work for a bank in their venture capital and private equity lending group. Our clients were venture capital funds and companies that had raised venture capital and private equity. And so I interacted on a daily basis with CFOs of growing technology companies. And I'd say that was another avenue of real direct exposure to the CFO, really as a service provider. And then it was at Majestic where I ultimately became the CFO. I was hired to run corporate development, and happy to talk a little bit more about that. But we were in the middle of a fundraising. We didn't have a CFO at the time. And because I had worked at a venture capital fund and was familiar with raising debt and equity and could talk to investors, they put me in the CFO seat on an interim basis, and it stuck. And that was, 18 years ago, 19 years ago.
Tell us something about Majestic Research. What type of outfit was it?
Sure. So Majestic was a data-driven financial technology and equity research firm that specialized in finding and developing unique data sets that had never before been used by the buy side, by hedge funds and or mutual funds to make investment decisions. And so what we did was we found these unique data sets and cleaned the data, back tested the data, and served it up to our clients. We grew to a client base of approximately 200 or so hedge funds and mutual funds who used our data to understand very specific metrics that public companies reported that would move stock price. So it could be the average selling price of an iPhone, which was a newer product at the time. It was same store sales for a company like CarMax. And our unique value add was we would map out the value chain of an industry. We would oftentimes try to find a software provider that sat in the middle of a transaction that developed this really unique exhaustive data that they were using for their core business, but were never really using to productize as a data set for Wall Street. So we were the first firm to commercialize the use of credit card data. Now, credit card data is used by just about every hedge fund and mutual fund and by the sell side to understand metrics that public companies report. We were the first company to commercialize that data and turn it into research because we got access to a panel for example, of 2 million credit card and debit card users on an anonymized basis, and we could see in real time what transactions were being reported on a weekly and monthly basis. So we could see, pick the company Starbucks, the number of transactions and the purchase price, and if volumes were going up or down. And that is probably one of the better, more well-known examples of the alternative data that we help to commercialize. Alternative data has turned into a really large part of how the street analyzes public companies, including companies like Warby Parker. But that is what Majestic focused on. And I was initially brought on to find and manage all of these unique data partnerships that we had. And then I ultimately evolved into the CFO role.
And again, you were there nearly 6 years, and it seems like you were there, you straddled the economic downturn while you were there. Can you tell us something about, as you look back on that? And finally, was it sold during your tenure?
Yes, it was sold. It was sold during my tenure. We went through an interesting moment navigating the economic downturn. And that was, I think, my first real experience as an operator, but my second experience as a professional navigating through a massive economic downturn. The first was the dot-com bust, where at this venture capital fund that I was working at, I helped to liquidate a number of our companies and manage orderly wind downs. At Majestic, it was navigating through the financial crisis in 2008, 2009, and we had to go through what a lot of other companies were going through at the time, which was understanding our cost structure and understanding where we could pull back, what's fixed, what's variable. We went through a meaningful RIF at the time and had those intense discussions with the board, who said, cut more, and we didn't want to cut to the bone so that we could make sure we're still investing in innovation, and sat in the CFO role certainly to help mediate and mitigate across those different discussions. The second part of your question was overseeing the sale of the company to ITG, which was a much larger publicly traded financial technology company, and was an amazing process. That started with a cold call from me to the head of corporate development at ITG to see if they wanted to start using some of our data in their trading systems and in some of the research that they provided to their clients, because we both served similar clients. What started as a corporate development discussion turned into an M&A discussion, and before we knew it, we got an unsolicited offer from ITG. We hired a banker. We turned it into more of a real process, and it ultimately led to a sale of Majestic to ITG.
One chapter came to the end and your Warby Parker chapter opened. We're curious if there was a headhunter, or was it part of your network, or how did you arrive there originally?
Yeah. And so I've never actually found a job through a headhunter. It's all been through kind of word of mouth or personal references, or something naturally evolved into something else. So after the sale of Majestic, I helped with the transition of Majestic into ITG, and then took some time off and thought through what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. Asked some of those existential questions and had the luxury of some time and space away from the desk and the spreadsheet to do that. And I kind of worked my personal network, had lots of coffee meetings to understand what could be out there. And then also thought through what it was that I wanted to do. Also took some time to, walk the earth, David Carradine style. I went to South Africa, where my family's from. I went to the UK, thought about what, moved me as a person, and took some time to reconnect with family. And came to the conclusion, in parallel with me reaching out to people in my network, that one, I wanted to work for a company that made a physical product, or had a physical supply chain, or did something physical in the world. Majestic where I was for about 6.5 years, was in the bits and bytes business, and we sold data, a very intangible product. It had a lot of value, but decided that I wanted to work for a company that had supply chain assets that I could touch. Wanted to make something. And number two, I wanted to work for a company that I felt had an underlying social mission. And that's been one of the themes in my career. It's why I kind of took a year off to do public service and work for New York City government for a year. I've always been fascinated by kind of the inner workings of government and wanting to feel attached to a mission. But it was really those sort of two things that I wanted: tangible products, to work for a company that had an underlying mission, and table stakes was hopefully meet and become a part of a leadership team that had a dynamic vision that was doing something new, unique, disruptive in the world. And I was lucky enough to get introduced to the founders of Warby Parker, Neil and Dave, who still co-run the company today as co-CEOs. There are four founders. Two run the day-to-day, all four on the board. The other two are on the board, but not at the company. But the four founded the company together. And I got introduced to Neil and Dave through a few common avenues. At GameLogic, my boss there became a partner at a venture capital fund called Spark Capital. Warby Parker was talking to Spark Capital about raising a round of investment, raising their Series B. And so a former boss sent my name across. One of our clients at Majestic Research, Tiger Global, one of our larger clients, was in the process, I didn't realize this at the time, of taking a close look at investing in Warby Parker. And the partner there, I'd gotten to know a little bit, Leith Excel. And then I also knew one of the early angel investors in Warby Parker. And so there were kind of 3 or 4 different people that I happened to know who put my hat in the ring. And when they heard that Warby was looking for a finance person, a VP of finance, a CFO, I had all these sort of common threads that brought me to Neil and Dave. And I got a lot of phone calls like after my first or second interview saying, "Hey, I just got a call to do a reference check on you." I said, "Oh, that's interesting. Haven't given you my name," but they were literally, it's a small community. And that's what led me to Warby Parker. So maybe a little bit more of a long-winded answer, but
oh, that's great. Wonderful, wonderful overview, though. That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Most of us know Warby Parker simply as the buy a pair, give a pair company, but tell us more of what this company is really about today.
Yeah, for sure. So Warby Parker is a vertically integrated, direct-to-consumer, holistic vision care provider. And our core product is eyeglasses. So we operate in a really large but fragmented industry. So it's a $68 billion industry. Half of the industry is accounted for by the larger national chains. The other half of the industry are independent ECPs, eye care professionals with maybe 1 to 2 or 1 to 3 locations. And Warby Parker got its start really redefining and disrupting the eyeglass category, and several years ago began its concerted evolution into a holistic vision care company where we offer eye exams, contact lenses, and prescription and non-prescription eyeglasses. The product is all branded Warby Parker. We don't sell anybody else's product. And we sell everything directly to the consumer through our own sales channels, either through our website or through our retail stores. We've got a fleet of 280 plus retail stores at this point and growing.
So just looking over that 13.5-year span that you've been there in the CFO office now, you've helped guide the company through hyper growth, retail expansion, and there was a public listing. And you just talked about holistic vision, which sounds like a chapter heading. Are there other chapter headings as well that we're overlooking? If we were trying to quickly summarize.
Yeah, I think you summarized the right chapters. So when I joined, the company was maybe 20 employees, no finance team. Today we're approaching 4,000 employees. When I joined, we had no stores. We weren't really planning to open any. Today we've got 280 plus and growing. We're opening 40 plus new retail stores a year. We hadn't raised much in the way of venture capital or private equity, and we were privately held. We ended up raising over 500 million in private equity across 8 rounds of funding, and we went public in September 2021. And so I think the way that you summarized kind of the arc or stages of that trajectory is kind of really, really accurate. Kind of early days, startup land, developing an internet-focused eyewear business, then evolving into a retailer and recapitalizing the business to become an omni-channel provider of eyewear, and then evolving through a public listing into a public company, which is how we're operating today.
Yeah, that was one of the intriguing chapters. The company amended its S1 to opt for a direct listing. So you chose this less common, lower cost route. Can you share with us, take us back a little? We always like to revisit IPOs. This is just as interesting for us. What factors drove that decision?
Yeah, a lot of factors drove that decision. So Warby Parker, back in the early days, we'd always say we're planning to go public in the next 12 to 24 months. And we'd say that, almost every year. So we wanted to make sure we were building the muscle memory to be able to become a public company. And in 2018, when Spotify went public through a direct listing, we became fascinated with that avenue to go public. There are three main ways of going public. There's a traditional IPO where you're selling stock in the company. There's a direct listing. Spotify was really the first company to do that in its current form in 2018. And the third is a SPAC. We took SPAC off the table and began becoming very familiar with direct listings and how they worked. And for us, it seemed like a much better way of going public for a few options. One is we didn't need to raise capital. And if you don't need to raise capital, why take the dilution of doing an IPO? So that was number one. Number two, we also found the process itself a lot more democratic and a lot more fair. In a traditional IPO, you price the sale of the stock the night before. You place it in the hands of investors who can sell it the very next day, oftentimes at a big pop. And we liked the notion that we can find a market clearing price in a way that benefits all shareholders, not just the ones who buy the stock the night before, potentially. And so from a process perspective, it seemed to fit well with our ethos. We also were very thoughtful about who we raised money from when we were private. We raised money from crossover public-private investors who we knew would support our stock, or who we believed would support our stock once we did a direct listing, and who would buy more. So folks like T. Rowe Price and Bailey Gifford and D1 Capital and Durable Capital. And that's, for any company considering a direct listing, I think that's a really important factor to consider, is do you have these crossover investors? Because the biggest unknown when you list your shares for sale, that's ultimately what you're doing in a direct listing, taking your existing shares and just listing them for sale. You don't know who's going to show up the day of to buy or sell. So that's a little bit of a nail biter, but we had a capital structure that we thought made doing a direct listing more of a possibility. The other factor that we liked is that all shareholders could participate. In a traditional IPO, there's a 6-month lockup. Typically, and we liked the fact that all shareholders, if they wanted to, could participate day one, existing investors, employees, and the like. And so for us, it felt like, even though more risky in some ways, because we don't have that certainty of buyers and sellers heading into the listing day, we thought for us, it was a better path to the public market.
Wow. Nice. Thank you for that. Warby Parker, as we discussed, helped to pioneer the direct-to-consumer model that circumvented, traditional channels. Curious about pricing here, though. What is your mindset when you think about balancing low price points with healthy unit economics?
Yeah, it's a great point. And so one of the at the time revolutionary models that we introduced as an eyewear company was really unified pricing. So we innovated and we continue to innovate in a number of key areas, including the customer experience, the look and feel of our retail stores, how our retail associates and optometrists and opticians serve the customer. We've developed our own point of sale solution, but we also innovated with pricing in two ways. One is by offering a singular price for a product that typically involves 3 to 5 separate purchase decisions. That's number one. And number two, offering a comparable quality product for a fraction of the cost. And so I'll talk a little bit about each of those to get to your question. Unified pricing is if you go into a traditional optical retailer, you choose the frame, that's one purchase decision. You choose the lens, and then the thickness of the lens, and then the coatings. You then go to checkout, and you have to understand and navigate whether or not you can use vision insurance. And before you know it, you've made a number of separate purchasing decisions, and you're paying, anywhere from, call it $300 to over $1,000 for a pair of single vision or progressive glasses. And our glasses, based on either single vision or progressive, so based on the prescription strength and the type of material, have a singular price. So the glasses that I'm wearing right here are acetate glasses, which cost $95. That includes the frame, the prescription lens with all of the coatings, and free home delivery. And so that unified pricing in and of itself is a much better customer experience. But by also developing a supply chain where in many ways we've, whether you call it cut out the middleman or go directly to the consumer, we don't have the wholesale to retail markup. We don't pay a licensing fee to another brand, and we're able to pass those savings along to our customers and do it in a way where we still have a very strong gross margin on a product specific basis. And so the way that we've been able to offer product at a dramatically lower price, it's by developing a very efficient supply chain and one that has less steps along the way where there are other third parties who can extract the value. And what we do is we're able to pass that value along to our customers and still do it at a very, very healthy margin. So we're, running a business and focused on serving the customer at all costs, but doing it in a way where we're balancing the customer experience with growth and making sure that we're driving continued profitability. Because today we have order of magnitude roughly 1% of the $68 billion industry. We believe that we've developed a customer experience and product set combined, which are truly unique within the optical industry. And so we constantly want to balance making sure that we're gaining market share and doing it in a thoughtful way so that we're also driving incremental, EBITDA is the lingo, incremental profitability as we do so.
Curious about the visibility you've achieved into, it's called store profitability. Are there, what metrics do you use to track and optimize inventory deployment and store profitability?
Yeah, great questions. And there are many different metrics that we track across the business. To the specific questions that you asked around store profitability, we'll look at four-wall EBITDA. We have two main sales channels, e-commerce and retail. In the context of retail, we talk a lot about our four-wall EBITDA number, in a very open way. And the way that we do that is by stating our target four-wall margins for our stores are 35%. And that's a number that we report on a very regular basis. As it relates to inventory, we'll take a look at the usual metrics, which include inventory turns, the growth in inventory year over year, sell-through metrics at a collection and product-specific level. And then we'll look at all of the factors that make up our cost of goods to understand what is each line item trending as a percentage of our revenue, how is that trending year over year, and just make sure that we're exposing all of these metrics to the teams that need them to make decisions.
Well, thank you, Steve. We're up to our finance strategic moment question, where we ask finance leaders to just pick out a moment of insight that they've experienced along the way in their careers. What comes to mind when we ask for finance strategic moment?
Yeah. So the first thing that comes to mind is really sitting in the CFO seat as we navigated how the company would respond to COVID. So, March 13th, Friday the 13th, 2020, was a day that we decided to close all of our retail stores, given the onset of this global pandemic. And nobody was really sure how this would affect all of us as individuals from a life safety perspective, from a business perspective. But the majority of our business at the time was and still continues to be retail. And we made the very difficult decision early on to shut down all of our stores. We kept them closed for 2 full months. As we began to navigate the COVID environment, we wanted to make sure that we were prioritizing the safety of customers and employees ahead of deciding to reopen our stores. We didn't reopen our office for 2 years as well. And that was certainly a challenging time to navigate. We had just gotten our budget for the year approved at the end of February. And remember, the first team meeting shortly after we decided to close down our stores, senior leadership team meeting, and said, remember that budget that we just got approved, that we spent all of that time working on? We need to forget about that. There's no longer a budget because it's not relevant. We need to put together a very short-term plan where we're operating and navigating and being as cost-conscious and thoughtful as possible to learn how to deploy resources and be safe and stay sane during this environment where there was really no playbook to manage. And so it became all about looking at the daily performance of the business and developing new lines of sight and understanding what it meant for our e-commerce channel, which began to grow, 100% plus year over year. And so the methodology we came up with internally on the finance team that we really used to manage how we deployed capital and how we responded was getting back to PAR, PAR. I'm not a big user of acronyms, but it's one we came up with, and the PAR was pause. There were lots of things we took a look at pausing. So opening up new retail stores, hiring individuals, new technology platforms we were rolling out. The next word was adjust. How do we want to adjust? And then how do we get back to redeployment? So it was certainly an incredibly challenging time for myself, for the full team here at Warby, for anybody who was navigating COVID at the time, who relied on physical assets and stores, certainly. And I'd say that was, a moment that comes to mind that I'd put in that sort of category that you were asking about.
We want to ask you to look back again and think about your first 60 days. You were at Majestic. You said you were in that corporate development role. You went into that CFO interim role. And then it was a short time after that, I imagine, that you got the title. But can you tell us something you didn't expect from the CFO role? When you finally got there, you knew everything about it. You'd already done the role, but then, here's something you wish you knew.
Sure. So many things, and I'm still learning every day. The one thing that comes to mind, which I wasn't really expecting, is one of the harder parts of the CFO role is oftentimes saying no, or asking people to justify, but doing that to your boss or your bosses, the CEOs, because you report to them, and you oftentimes have to navigate that fine line of having a difference of opinion, and expressing it over the course of many years, where you're still able to maintain a strong relationship, but express that no, or if it's not no, which it oftentimes shouldn't be, it's help me understand the rationale behind, or help me understand if we go down this path versus the other path, what the pro and con is. And I would say one of the more challenging parts of being a CFO is certainly threading that line and feeling comfortable navigating differences of opinion, and doing it in a way that strengthens the relationship as opposed to adds friction or tension into the relationship. It's an evolving balance and set of learnings that continue to this day in a positive way.
Nice. Thank you for that. Steve, we always like to ask our guests to reflect a little on the personal side for us. You've been there 13 and a half years. Can't imagine there's anything your colleagues don't know about you. But what's something most people don't know about you?
So I would say a couple things. My family's from South Africa, so some people don't know that I was born in South Africa, lived there till I was 6. My father owned a jazz club there, which he often operated illegally under the apartheid regime, where blacks and whites were not allowed to mingle or socialize together. And it became a venue where illegally black musicians and white musicians would jam together. I don't think a lot of people might realize sort of that aspect to my family story. My parents chose to immigrate from South Africa in large part because they did not agree with the politics of the country. I have 2 new twin boys, August and Elijah, who are 8 months old. So I've come to realize that my most important role in life, it's not as a CFO, it's as a father and life partner to Rosie, who I am in this with, joined at the hip. And so I would kind of add that as well as something
Well, wonderful.
People might not know. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for those. We usually ask for a quick book selection or something that's a resource that you might count on. I don't know. Anything you recommend for us? Or
Yeah, 2 books come to mind. I wouldn't say they're in the more recent category, but one is the book Built to Last, which I remember reading in my earlier days as a strategy consultant, and just many fascinating examples and stories of how companies built lasting competitive strategy, competitive advantage. And the second is more of an academic book. It's what drew me to first work at Monitor Company. One of the partners at Monitor was a Harvard Business School professor, Michael Porter, and he wrote a seminal book called The Competitive Advantage of Nations, which talked about not just how companies can compete and achieve advantage, but how whole societies and countries can compete and achieve sustainable advantage. So we'd call out those 2 books.
Yeah, wonderful. We've had Porter on strategy before, never this one, though. So thank you for those great resources. Finally, we're up to our final question. We'd like you to look forward finally for the coming 12 months, Steve. Tell us what your priorities are as a CFO.
So my priorities as a CFO for the coming 12 months is to continue to make sure that the company is allocating capital wisely, to make sure that we continue balancing growth with profitability, We continue to operate in a very dynamic macro environment, which has some uncertainty, and there's an ensuing trade war. And so it's certainly, wanting to make sure that we're navigating this environment in as thoughtful a way as possible. And table stakes, it's continuing to invest in people and prioritizing team as finance leaders and as any type of department leader would know. You really live and die by the success of your team or respective teams, and it's just wanting to make sure that we're investing in people, and that our teams have the support, resources, and tools to manage and navigate through the day-to-day of what can be quite stressful at times in as thoughtful and successful a way as possible.
Steve Miller, thank you for joining us on CFO Thought Leader.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here, and I look forward to talking again.